Hello, my name is Ashley, and on behalf of the Russo Law Group, thank you all for joining us on today's webinar where we will be discussing Are My Rental Properties Protected? Asset Protection with an LLC and Written Leases. Before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. We have muted your microphones to help minimize any audio distractions. Please submit questions through the Q&A window provided on your Zoom toolbar. We will try to address them as we go along. We've also saved time at the end for open Q&A. We should be together today for about 45 minutes. We created a PowerPoint for the program, which we are showing on the screen. We are also recording this and we'll email you the slides and the video. Please complete a survey and leave us your feedback about today's program. You will access the survey from your web browser. It will open automatically when we end the webinar. So if anyone has questions about housekeeping, please just shoot me a message in the chat window. All right, now I am happy to introduce today's presenters, Deanna Eble and Tommaso Marasco. We'll start with Deanna. She is a partner at Russo Law Group. She focuses on elder law, estate planning, special needs planning, and Medicaid planning. And she's been practicing these areas for almost 20 years. She is the lead planner in 3 of our office locations, including Islandia, Garden City, and Manhattan. She is currently appointed to the executive committee of the New York State Bar Association in the Medicaid division. Tommaso Marasco, also known as Tommy, is an associate and the newest member to join Team Russo. Before joining the firm, Tommy had a solo practice in estate planning and real estate. His practice areas also include guardianship, trust and estate, probate, small business planning, and business succession planning. Lastly, he is a committee member of the United Cerebral Palsy Association of Greater Suffolk. So now I will turn it over to Deanna to walk us through our agenda.
Okay, are we good?
Yeah, do you see the agenda on the screen?
Yeah, my screen
Okay.
changed for a second. I wasn't sure if it was.
I was making sure I had the right thing showing. You should be
right.
seeing the agenda now.
All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. What we're going to cover today is why a written lease is important, because there's certainly some pitfalls and things to be concerned about if you're renting any type of property, whether residential or commercial. How can I reduce my liability on those rentals? How should I manage my rental income? And can LLCs be used to minimize estate taxes? Tommy and I are going to hopefully give you a lot of useful information that you can then move on and manage those properties in a way that is much more protective for you and just makes a lot of good business sense. So Tommy, I think you could take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So the first topic we are going to cover is the importance of a written lease. Now, many of us know the usual terms that are included in a lease, and the primary function is to basically control what happens during the lease period. And the main function is to have a clear path to the terms of the lease in order to avoid ambiguities, because that is usually where most issues arise. Some of those examples that you can see here are whether or not to mandate the need for renter's insurance by the tenant. You can control how issues are dealt with in the event of a non-payment, or if perhaps the tenant fails to leave after the lease term ends. You can also limit access to certain parts of the premises, meaning if you have a house and there is specific either a garage or a basement or an attic space that you would like to reserve for yourself, you would be able to limit access to those parts of the premises. Other things such as allowing or not allowing pets. So some of these items are more of the ones that people usually tend to think of, but there's others that people don't foresee issues with, but can arise to become issues. One of those is who is responsible for utilities and which ones. The other one that's, prevalent to New York is something as simple as snow removal or limiting liability of the landlord. So without a written lease, a lot of these will go unanswered. And so if in the event, let's say, and this has happened before, I've had a situation where landlord had called me and had said that there was snow on the ground that was never removed by the tenant. There was no written lease, so it wasn't clear whose responsibility it was. There was never a discussion about it. And there happened to be a slip and fall issue that occurred on the premises. And that can obviously cause potential issues that can be extremely grave for a landlord. So having such thing as a indemnity agreement in a lease that says how the liability of the landlord is going to be limited in such an event could be very beneficial, especially if it's something as small as it seems as snow removal, just so that it's clear. And that's, we go back to what we said about having a clear path to the terms of the lease. It's clear whose responsibility is what to prevent that issue from coming up. Because a lot of the times the reasons why people resort to court is because those issues weren't handled or there wasn't a clear answer. And so they will go to have that answer resolved or how to handle the situation after it arises. So the whole point of the lease is to try and anticipate as much as possible given the situation, so we can try to avoid having to get to those situations that cost everybody time, money, and resources. So yeah, I think that as I said, making sure that everybody is on the same page is vital in terms of leasing, and that goes for both obviously commercial and residential.
Tommy, you had mentioned when we were putting this together that there was an ambiguity that people confuse sometimes with regard to evicting somebody and the terms of the lease and how somebody can be evicted, whether it's a 30-day term to be for eviction to start. I know that we're in a standstill right now for evictions, but can you just give a little sense to everybody where we stand right now and your caution on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a lot of clients previously state, well, I like the fact that I don't have a written lease that I am locked into. So that way, if in the event I want to have my tenant leave the premises, I can have them do so quickly. And what they're referring to is a month-to-month tenancy. And what that requires in order to terminate that tenancy would be a 30-day notice. But it's not 30 calendar days as you would figure. And let's say we're now at the 27th of May. That doesn't mean 30 days from now it would come into effect. You would have to serve them, you'd have to provide them with written notice properly, and it would actually have to be one full calendar month. And the implications are this: if they were given now, we'll say we're on May 27th, we'll keep this example. If they were to be served with that notice prior to June 1, then the earliest you'd be able to have them removed from the premises would be July 1. However, if notice was served on them, even if it was June 1st, the earliest you'd be able to remove them would be August 1st, because you did not give them one entire full calendar month. And I think that is something that's a common misconception, that people read the 30-day notice, but not knowing that the actual practice of the courts is an actual calendar month, not 30 calendar days. And just so everyone on this call is aware, and if you are landlords, perhaps you're aware of this already, but the moratorium on evictions for both commercial and residential has now been extended through August 31st.
Okay, and they can certainly check back in, and I'm sure that we will have information if the moratorium is lifted or is extended. We will definitely have that information available and be blasting it out probably sometime in July or August. So thank you very much, Tommy. That was very helpful. Okay, so now moving on, we're also talking about how do you reduce your liability. So one aspect was to have the lease in place so that it's clear who's responsible for what. And other ways to reduce liabilities is to deal with different tools available like LLCs. So when somebody owns the property in their own name, they can be sued. And when they're sued, the lawsuit can attach to their own house, their personal assets, anything that they own in their name, because it's owned in their name and they own the property in their name. And so when somebody's looking for deep pockets to sue, even for something as simple as a slip and fall, whether it's people out there trying to take advantage of a situation and commit some kind of fraud or not, they're still exposing your assets, which could on some level ensue panic in you and then put you at a point where you waited too long to start moving things. And even if you moved it tomorrow with knowledge that there's a pending lawsuit, they may still be able to pull it back in. So we definitely want to be mindful of that. And I'm sure most of you who are on this call today are thinking about these things, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't thinking about it. The other thing to know when the assets are in your name alone is those assets, depending on how they're held in your name, whether it's joint with somebody or has right of survivorship, if it's just your name, then on the deed itself with something in just your name, it's subject to probate. So probate is taking your will, if you have one, to court and having a judge confirm that everything that you put in your will was done properly, and then the family can step in and collect the assets and distribute them, which is time consuming and also costly. And so what a lot of people do is, even if they don't go the LLC route, which we'll talk about in a minute, they try not to own assets in their name alone because they want to avoid that probate process. And just as a caveat, if there is no will in place, instead of calling it probate, it's called an administration. So Maria, you want to know if property is in corporation and within a family trust, is it protected if sued individually? So there's layers to that. So when you start putting assets in a corporation, if you go corporation and then corporation puts it into a family trust, there's even more levels to it. The family trust itself, just a family trust, may not necessarily be a level of protection that you're looking for. You may want to take the assets and then add an LLC to it, because depending on how the family trust is written, it may still have some exposure to your personal assets. But you definitely want to layer, and that's what Tommy and I are hoping to get across to you today, that the more you layer things, the better off you'll be from a liability standpoint and from the standpoint of estate taxes. So I hope that answers your question. And the one layer in particular that many people use in this kind of setting where there's rental property, whether it's residential or commercial, is to establish an LLC. Because when you establish an LLC, you're limiting creditors from attaching other assets that are personally owned by you. Now, please understand that it's a layer. So at some point, if they wanted to get there, there's always some possibility that they can get there, but it's much harder for them to get to your personal assets first, because the LLC is a silo and independent of itself. And when you do an LLC, if it's done properly and there's an operating agreement for it, which a lot of people, surprisingly enough, I find, and sadly, Ashley was right on. I'm in this practice for 20 years. It shouldn't be sad. It means I have a lot of experience. But many people forget or don't do an operating agreement. They'll go and they'll order the corporate kit. They'll set up everything with New York State, and then they don't take the step to do an operating agreement. And that operating agreement is so very important, because the operating agreement basically spells out who's the owner, who has control over things, who's managing things. As we switch to the next slide, you'll see the operating agreement can also talk about the income stream. If there's multiple owners, it tells you who's in charge. And one of the biggest things about an operating agreement is that it can have succession in there. See, a lot of people, if there's no operating agreement, then you're in that probate process, dealing with the asset through the probate court, even if only one person of all of the people passed. So you want to make sure there's some kind of succession, and not that, oh my goodness, all of a sudden you're partnered with somebody that you trust, and now because the operating agreement was never considered, you're now partnering with your former partner's crazy son, and that wasn't your expectation. You never thought that you would get that way. You thought that at some point the two of you would sell the business together, or one would buy the other out, and this crazy son is not managing the business the way that you thought it was going to be managed. Like, you're mindful of taking care of the property and making sure the upkeep is really considered, and this particular son is just worried about how he can line his pockets. So that's important, because one of the biggest things that you should be mindful of when you have a rental property is that it's much more cost effective to regularly maintain the property than dealing with the issues only on an emergency basis, because tenants can really make your life miserable in an emergency. If you keep maintaining it, not only in that situation, the maintenance of it helps you to make it more marketable, but you're running it like a business. So there's tax benefits to putting more money into the property to make it more marketable. And it cuts your liability, because the less concern with water damage or pipes that aren't working right. Or I saw a story on News 12 the other day where a couple was living in Brooklyn, and they had a roach problem in the apartment. And right now in the city, they're really hurting for the real estate market, because so many people are coming out here to Long Island. They want to get out of the city. The population was crazy for COVID, and the school system wasn't the best and functioning at the peak during COVID. So people really want to be out of there before the next school year. And this couple said, well, I could either deal with these issues, or the market is such that I could just go find another apartment. And they found another apartment that was bigger than what they were in and much more updated, and it cost them like $100 more a month. And they were very content with that. So by not maintaining your properties, not only does it expose you to liabilities because someone can get hurt or potentially something can go wrong, but it also affects your potential to maintain the tenants that you have. When we talk about the income stream, we want smart management of the income, because I do a lot of Medicaid planning for people, and I have many clients who have multiple properties. They have a couple of residential houses, for example, that they have acquired over the years, and they rent them out. And the income stream is important, one, because you want to make sure that it's managed properly and you're reinvesting in the business. But also, too, you want to know how the income is coming in, because from the standpoint of government benefits, you want to be able to manage the income in a way that doesn't affect someone's ability to get benefits. So there's a planning aspect to it also, because when you're looking at the big picture, it's not just how do we protect our liability, it's also how do we plan for this estate. So somebody may put assets into a revocable trust, like Maria was saying before. A revocable trust can add layers. We can have an LLC and then have the revocable trust own the shares of stock from the LLC, and then there's another layer that keeps it from your personal assets. We can also put that LLC into an irrevocable trust, and that could be any type of irrevocable trust, whether it's long-term care planning or estate tax planning. There's different nuances in how we do that, and in doing that, we can dictate that the income goes back into the business and doesn't get paid out to the individual. If you're starting to age and you're worried about how things will play out with your long-term care costs. So you could definitely use an irrevocable trust or a revocable trust to manage the income source. You also have to be concerned when you own a business like this that You have a really good power of attorney so that if something happens to you, somebody can step in and manage things. And you also, in using trust, whether it's revocable or irrevocable, that helps somebody manage the income that's coming in if you lack capacity or you're looking for some type of assistance. The more opportunity for somebody to step into your shoes just on a moment's notice, the better off you are, because, and you've heard me say it a couple of times, we want to avoid probate. Well, probate means that someone has to wait for the court over a couple of months or more to get permission to step in and to manage things, and the tenants can run amok in that time. Same thing if you were to get sick. Like, if we're hearing all these stories about people with COVID and how tragically people are, you know, 1 minute they're sitting in their house and the next minute they're on a vent in a hospital. I understand the numbers are coming down, but this is what we were going through in 2020. And in those moments, when you have a rental property, if you don't have your planning documents, like your power of attorney, in place, then somebody else may not be able to step in and legally collect the rent and make sure that things are functioning the way that they need to function. And that's crucial. That's another level of liability that you want to protect yourself with. Next slide. So at the same time, we are always looking to minimize taxes, because a lot of people who have multiple houses, they tend to be people who are looking at a higher tax bracket, and the likelihood that the real estate over time increases in value. There's a lot of potential for that. Even in this market, there's potential for that. And by having the real estate increase in value, you run the risk that you might have some estate tax issues down the road. You know, that roughly $6 million threshold in New York and that roughly $12 million threshold federally. When you have real property, like in Nassau and Suffolk County and probably parts of Queens, real property is booming. Sales are booming. It's a seller's market. All of a sudden, you have the potential to sell a property with a bidding war that you're getting $40,000, $50,000 over asking price. Then when you collect that money, that's great, but then is it going to cause a tax liability? So one of the ways of dealing with taxes is you can do some gifting, and that helps lower your estate tax value. And so the reason why LLCs work very well for gifting is because if you have a deed, so let's play this out. You have a deed that has your name on it, and you decide, all right, I want to put my son John on the deed. Well, John is in a very rocky marriage, and if you risk when you put him on the deed that even though it shouldn't be, you know, there's the possibility that could come up in his divorce if he got divorced. Or the other day I was meeting with a client whose son has creditor issues, and she wants to ultimately give him the house, but there's concern about giving it to him outright now because he has creditor problems. So in doing stuff like trust and LLCs, you're able to gift to somebody without necessarily putting it in their name and having issues there. And so the story I tell people all the time, and it's a real story, I, about 15 years ago, was working in an office that a couple came in. They had 3 sons, and mom and dad didn't want the expense of doing an LLC or a trust, and they took their property and put all 3 of their sons' names on it. And they said, we're not a family that fights or anything like that. We just want to add our sons to this, and then that'll be it. When we die, they'll get everything equally. And unfortunately, one of the sons died before mom and dad. And when that happened, his estate was technically entitled to a third. I mean, mom and dad were still living, and it happened to be their primary residence. And the daughter-in-law sued the parents for her husband's 1/3 share, that they had to get a mortgage on their own property that was paid off already to pay off their daughter-in-law because she was demanding her husband's share and was entitled to it. If you do things like an LLC or a trust, the LLC operating agreement can make sure that it passes to somebody else and not to the daughter-in-law, as will the trust. So that's, a big thing. We also, with LLCs, if we're really concerned about the estate taxes, we sometimes take an LLC and make it voting and non-voting shares. So how does that help with things? Well, instead of gifting a particular interest outright to a child or to a trust that a child's going to manage, mom and dad, I've had those situations where mom and dad say, yeah, I don't mind gifting, but I want to keep control. And when we split the shares to be voting and non-voting, mom and dad can gift away non-voting shares, which have little or no value really to the kids, because who wants to purchase non-voting shares? And mom and dad, while they're keeping less interest, they're keeping the most important interest because it's the interest that has the most control. And when you're doing that type of gifting, not only are you gifting away a portion of the estate, but you're gifting it away at a discounted rate. Because again, who wants to purchase non-voting shares? So it helps to minimize your estate overall. And we use irrevocable trust also to lower estate tax liability, where we do revocable trusts that are equivalent to making a gift, but we're putting it in a trust for a child or any individual, in a way that it's protected, but not necessarily theirs. And so those are some key ways of using trusts and or LLCs to help deal with your rental property and how things play out. Okay, Ashley, I think I'm ready for the next slide. All right, so are my rental properties protected? In summary, Tommy gave you some key points on why a written lease is very important. Certainly it helps to paint the picture over who's responsible for what. And really, I think one of the major highlights in Tommy's discussion is cutting your liabilities. A key point to cutting your liabilities is to put in your written lease that the tenant should have renter's insurance, because that also helps to cut your liability, because what your insurance doesn't cover, the renter's insurance may. And that's an important aspect that I don't know that every person who's renting is mandating that the tenant get renter's insurance. So that's one really good takeaway from today that I hope that you consider the next time you have a tenant sign on their lease or renew their lease. Reducing liability for your business, which is your rental. LLCs do a great job in reducing your liability because they take that rental property and make it a silo. And what some people do, even to the extent that they have multiple rental properties, is they do LLCs for each individual rental property, so that they're creating silos for each individual property, and that if somebody falls on property A, they can't come after the value and assets of property B. So the more detailed you get, the better off you are. How you manage your rental income is crucial in understanding, one, who's getting the rental income if there's multiple partners, how it's being reinvested, and what happens to it if you got sick and somebody needed to step in. And LLCs can certainly be used to minimize estate taxes, because by establishing an LLC, you can manipulate the LLC in such a way that you can use it in the sense of gifting in a lot of gifting programs. And by doing that, you're minimizing the estate taxes that you're exposed to. So those are some key points for our summary. And I think that Tommy and I can certainly take some questions right now. Someone has to have a question. Okay, so I have one question that I see. Tommy, what is the average cost for issues that arise from poorly written leases?
Well, that can vary greatly, especially given the circumstances, but I would have to say in my experience that you're looking at a minimum of a $5,000 cost. And like I said, depending on what type of issue has arisen, especially if it's something as a slip and fall or something of that nature, then it can really go upward. But if it's just even your simple eviction, you're certainly at a minimum of 5,000.
Okay, thank you. And can you give us a sense of how people are changing their lease terms based on COVID? Like, has COVID affected anybody's view of lease terms?
There people have been trying to issue certain caveats where in terms of payments of rent and seeking relief. Certain landlords are incorporating terms that it says that despite the financial any type of hardship or any other circumstance that may arise, especially given the surrounding circumstances, that it does not excuse them from any liability in terms of rent owed or abatements. So people, I think, are just now starting to get worried, especially given the fact that certain landlords may be sitting on properties where they've been losing income for a year or more at this point, and they just want to know that if in the event they have some type of way of recouping after the fact.
Okay. Maria, I have a question from you that says difference between LLC and S corporation for liability. Essentially, they have the same type of liability. People distinguish between LLCs and S corporations from a tax standpoint. And that is generally why people do one over the other. A lot of our clients are doing LLCs and running the rental as a business through a limited liability corporation. What does it cost, Lou? What does it cost to set up an LLC? I own a single family home in Long Beach that I rent. The cost that is a good question, and I should have had that readily available for you. So there's cost associated on different levels. So if you're looking for us as a firm to get involved, especially in helping you with the operating agreement, then there are costs associated with that. But separate and apart, establishing an LLC, you have to do that through New York State. And I want to say, don't quote me on this, but I think my last LLC, it was about somewhere around $1,000 to $1,500 to get incorporated. But I should have had that answer for you, and I will get you a roundabout answer, and have when Ashley sends you the PowerPoint, I'll have her note what the costs are generally. I apologize. Any other questions? Okay, I think Ashley, you can take it back from us.
I will. And let me
Oh, wait,
turn
I have
on
one more
my.
comment. I apologize for interrupting you. And we have another question. So one of the other things that is important to understand, because I know that the market is booming right now for sales in on Long Island in particular, is we do while we do all of this, we do also handle real estate deals, especially in Nassau and Suffolk County. So if that's an issue that you're looking for anybody to step in, we could certainly be a service. Eileen, if we use I'm thinking, you mean LLC? Can it be reverted back to private names at any time should we decide to live? Yes, it can be reverted back, because the operating agreement will tell you how to do that. And honestly, I have a family right now that I'm working with that they have a property that they inherited. It's 3 sisters inherited property upstate New York. And they are considering, even though they're not renting the property out, they are considering an LLC for it, so that when each of the sisters passes, they can use the operating agreement to make sure that their children get their share, and that they can dictate in the operating agreement what happens with what, because there's a lot of dynamics going on. There's one property, one house on the property, and one child has the potential to build on the property. So they're actually using an LLC to manage all of that. So you definitely can do that. And Maria, I have 4 LLCs with a partner. Getting operating agreements clear is very important, correct? Yes, 100%. Operating agreements are absolutely crucial, because the operating agreement in particular will dictate what happens if one of you passes. You also want to be able to, in an operating agreement or in a power of attorney, make sure that someone understands there's a person that you've designated to step in and handle your business affairs if you can't handle them yourself. So you definitely need to have operating agreements in place, and people don't always think to do that. Alex, is it safe to have all of them in S Corp in my name? Is it safe to have all of them in an S Corp in my name? Well, they are a corporation. I honestly have to think about that one a little bit, Alex. I will get you an answer to that. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, wait.
Alex says thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I will definitely get you an answer for that because it's an S corporation in your name. I just want to think that one through before I give you an answer right off the top of my head. All right. Oh, wait, I see another one. Does it make sense to have an LLC for principal residence? It doesn't always make sense to have an LLC for principal residence. A lot of times what we do with a principal residence is we put them in a trust so that you avoid the probate process for, you know, if something happens to you. And depending on what you're looking to accomplish, we also use trusts, irrevocable trusts, to protect the principal residence from long-term care costs. And we do irrevocable trusts to help to get the principal residence out of your estate for estate tax purposes over a period of time. So principal residence, I would probably go irrevocable trust as opposed to an LLC. I would definitely go trust over LLC.
Agreed.
All right, Ashley, I'll give you back the, what if I put the S Corp in a trust? Alex, I will get you the answers on the S Corp because the S Corp is something that I am not comfortable speaking off the top of my head on.
Okay.
All right.
So I will jump in for closing statements here. Who are we and what makes Russo Law Group different? Well, it's our experience. We've served clients with estate planning, elder law, Medicaid, and special needs for over 35 years. We have 5 partners, 5 associates, and over 20 administrative and support staff. We've served over 18,000 families in New York City and Long Island, and we are ranked as a best law firm by the US News. We also want to stay involved within the community, and part of that is by offering informative, relevant webinars that will help you. So I hope you can join us again on June the 10th for our next webinar, and it will be on the top 8 changes in New York State's power of attorney law. If you are interested in registering, I am sending a message through the chat window. You can click that link to sign up. Otherwise, please keep an eye out for your emailed invitation, and always feel free to share the invite with family, friends, and colleagues.
Just as a add on to that, Ashley, the change that we're talking about on the 10th is a power of attorney change that takes effect on June 13th.
Yeah.
So it's very up and coming. So it's important to get that information so you know what the pros and cons are of the change.
Okay, lastly, if you need help with your estate plan, obviously contact us for a planning meeting with an experienced estate and elder law attorney. Those of you on today's webinar are eligible to receive an exclusive discount. This meeting is typically $475, but we are offering it to you for just $300. So please keep an eye out for your incentive to be emailed along with today's recording. You will need to bring in the coupon with you to the meeting to receive the discount. So in closing, I would like to thank our presenters, Deanna and Tommy. Thanks for coming on and sharing some stories and your knowledge with us. And we also appreciate all of you who joined us today.
Yes.
Thank you all.
And enjoy your holiday weekend as it is now the end of May,
Wow, that flew by.
right?
All
Crazy.
right. Happy holiday weekend, everybody. Be
Yeah.
well and stay safe.
I agree.
Hi,
Stay
guys.
safe.
All right. Bye.
Bye.